One of the many accusations thrown at Lucy Letby during the court case related to the Countess of Chester was the idea that she hadn't cried over infants related to the court case. This is a claim that's been repeated online since the court case. I'm sure it's something that people watching this video will have encountered. So in this video, we're going to assess the validity of this particular assertion. So this all began when prosecutor Nick Johnson was cross-examining Lucy Letby in relation to the deaths of two triplet brothers on successive days at the Countess of Chester. Mr. Johnson asked Lucy if there was any reason that you cry when you talk about yourself, but you don't cry when talking about these dead and seriously injured children. So Lucy simply replied by stating, "I have cried when talking about some of those babies." So Mr. Johnson should be aware that Lucy had already sobbed in court as she recalled the traumatic death of an infant at the hospital. In fact, I believe that at some point court proceedings had to be interrupted because she was too upset to continue. So this is the Guardian article from Friday the 5th of May 2023. Now, I want to be clear, this was only 12 days prior to Nick Johnson questioning Lucy Letby in court. That was on the 17th of May 2023. Lucy Letby sobbed in court as she recalled the traumatic death of a baby boy she allegedly murdered before poisoning his twin brother with insulin. The nurse wiped away tears with a tissue as she told the jury she had never seen a baby bleed in that way before when the 5-year-old boy died in front of his parents. "I found Child E's death very traumatic," Letby said, becoming emotional. And then it continues talking about Child E losing blood volume. Letby was the designated nurse for Child E and had responsibility for comforting his parents when he died, the court was told. She told jurors this meant fulfilling their wishes to bathe and dress him, record a memento of his hand and footprints, and take photographs after his death. They didn't have clothes at that point, so we found him a gown from the unit to be dressed in, Lucy said, wiping her eyes with tissues. Letby said she created a memory box for the boy's parents containing 2 teddy bears, one for Child E and another for his twin brother Child F. Then there's some more general stuff. Earlier on Friday, Letby told her trial it must have been unimaginable for parents to lose a newborn baby. She said she had been stunned by the death of a 1-day-old twin boy she allegedly murdered 90 minutes into a shift, saying it had been a complete shock. To walk into the unit that evening and the first time to met those parents be in that awful situation, I think it was just curiosity to see the people behind the awful event that happened, she mentions with regard to the Facebook search. The nurse giving evidence beside 2 prison officers said she had been just stunned when the child suddenly deteriorated after being healthy and stable earlier in the day. "It was complete shock for all of us. It felt like we walked through the door into this awful situation. It was the first time I'd met Child A, the first time I met his parents. It was a huge shock." So then there's another incident here in which the headline is "Tearful Lucy Letby said it's always me when it happens, court told." GP says it seemed a pretty normal reaction amid series of collapses of infants at Chester Hospital. So Dr. Lucy Beebe told jurors, "I remember Lucy crying with another nurse, and it was very much the gist of it's always me when it happens, my babies. It's always happening to me a lot." Beebe agreed with Letby's barrister Ben Myers KC and also told police that the defendant's tearful exchange seemed a pretty normal reaction given the upsetting events at the hospital. Asked about her reaction to Child I's death, she replied, "Shock and frustration at the time because, on reflection, I felt there was something else going on with Child I that we were not getting to the bottom of. It was sad because I remember the family and the whole situation was just very sad and frustrating." So we've seen these 2 incidents. Firstly, Lucy openly crying in court over one death, and then this is another death of Child I where you can see she's part of a kind of communal mourning on the unit. Then we have the Kathryn de Beger statement from the Thirlwell inquiry, where she's talking about meeting with Lucy as part of her occupational health procedure. And during this statement, she says, During these meetings, Lucy did speak to me about the parents of the babies. She felt distressed and upset, but how much more distressed and upset the parents must be feeling because they had lost their babies. And Kathryn de Beger also recounts incidences of Lucy crying during these sessions. Then we move on to this very important detail. So the court heard that Lucy cried when telling police about the deaths of 2 triplets. Neonatal nurse in tears when being questioned about babies she allegedly murdered on return from holiday, jury told. So we'll now examine this article in more detail. So just go over a couple of passages from this article. Lucy Letby cried as she described the devastating deaths of 2 babies from a set of triplets she allegedly murdered a day apart before being removed from frontline nursing, a court has heard. The neonatal nurse broke down in tears as she was questioned by police about the babies she allegedly killed immediately after returning from a holiday to Ibiza, Manchester Crown Court was told on Tuesday. Asked by police how she felt when child P unexpectedly died, Letby broke down and said, "It was just devastating for us all, and then to have them both, obviously she couldn't continue because she was crying." The nurse said she dressed the dead brothers and took photographs of them in their Moses basket at the request of their parents. Asked whether it was normal for a nurse to do this, she told officers, "If that's what they wanted me to do, I wanted to do it. As I said, they wanted me to dress them as well." So bear in mind, she didn't just break down during the police interview. She didn't just sob over this child and over what occurred to these triplets. This was conveyed to the court very specifically and a very short period of time before Mr. Johnson asked his question about why did you cry over any of the infants, when there have been more than one incident where she's cried in court. It's been recounted that she's cried on other occasions. He has observed this, and yet he still asked this question. So let's return to the question, the kind of accusatory question itself. So here is Mr. Johnson asking Lucy Letby if there was any reason that you cry when you talk about yourself, but you don't cry when talking about these dead and seriously injured children. Not only should he have known and should it have been crystal clear that it has been recounted to the court that she did cry in a police interview, that she did cry in hospital, and that she had actually cried in court, but they're discussing the deaths of 2 triplet brothers on successive days. So this is the article that is discussing these triplets, and we find out that Nick Johnson is asking this question during the discussion regarding children that the court has been told Lucy Letby broke down during police interviews. This is just days before the court has been told that Lucy Letby very specifically cried over the very children that are being discussed at the time that this question was asked. And we heard Lucy recount to the court the following. Mr. Myers asked her what the atmosphere was like when a baby died on the unit, and she said, "It's completely flat. There is a complete change in atmosphere. To me personally, it's devastating. You want to save every baby in your care. You're not supposed to watch a baby die." The nurse said that the requirements of Child P were beyond our level of care. Despite the presence of the specialist team, Child P collapsed and died. Asked to give a sense of the mood in the hospital at the time, Miss Letby said, "Everybody was shocked, devastated. I was really upset to have that 2 days in a row, to imagine what those parents had gone through. It was harrowing. You don't forget something like that." So this is just further reporting. Lucy Letby cried as she described the devastating deaths of 2 babies from a set of triplets she allegedly murdered a day apart before being removed from frontline nursing, a court has heard. The neonatal nurse broke down in tears as she was questioned by police about the babies she allegedly killed immediately after returning from a holiday to Ibiza. Letby, 33, denies murdering 7 babies and attempting to kill another 10. She's accused of murdering 48-hour-old child O by injecting his nasogastric tube with air, although that's been withdrawn now, before fatally attacking his brother child P the same way a day later. So this is child O and child P. If we go back, what they're discussing, child O. So the court has literally been told that she cried. She cried in the police interviews. The court was told about this. You know, he witnessed her cry on other occasions. He witnessed other occasions of being upset and crying being recounted to the court. There was further testimony that recounted these things. I'm not even going into all the incidents here in this video. So when Nick Johnson made this cross-examination and asked this question of Lucy Letby, he knew this was deliberately untrue. I mean, this is essentially a lie. I mean, he could ask that he could claim, I suppose, that he was asking a question, but that question itself contained a deliberate misrepresentation. And it has to be deliberate because this is days before this question was asked. It's not even this. You can't say, well, it was months before, it was a different child, etc., etc. Lucy had been on the stand in, October 2000. That still wouldn't be acceptable, of course, but that could be made as an argument. This was days before that this was recounted. It's days before that Lucy has cried in court. It's days before that the court proceedings have been interrupted. It's days before they've heard this testimony on multiple occasions relate to exactly the same children in one of those occasions. And I think the most disturbing thing about this is not just the fact that lots of people still believe this to be true. That's pretty disturbing in itself. But perhaps the most disturbing thing is that no one objected. There was no objection from the defence. There was no objection from the judge. So we can conclude from that, and we can infer from that this is perfectly normal. This must happen in court all the time. Nick Johnson obviously thought this is a perfectly legitimate thing to do. I won't be pulled up on this. This is just the kind of thing I do in court all the time. Indeed, it's the kind of thing that barristers do in court all the time. He's probably not doing anything out of the ordinary. Probably, if it was the other way around, Ben Myers might have done this, and Nick Johnson would have been defending her. Who knows? But having read about the background to Andrew Malkinson, I know for a fact that case was almost entirely predicated on an assassination of Malkinson's character by the prosecuting barrister, because they had no evidence whatsoever. They had one eyewitness account that I believe turned out came from a heroin addict, and it was grossly inaccurate. That was it. There was no other evidence because Andrew Malkinson wasn't at the scene of the crime, so there couldn't have been any other evidence. So they just assassinated his character in court, and clearly there must have been no objection to that, just as there's no objection to this. So in my view, that poses very serious questions about the way the criminal justice system operates, and whether this confrontational methodology that is used in this adversarial system, there surely have to be question marks about the way the adversarial system works. I do believe it's important to get more expert evidence in there, and that this is done in a better way with better experts, and that needs to be more impartial, etc., etc. That's absolutely key. But I do think there have to be questions about the adversarial system, because it's open to this kind of abuse. I mean, I think this is an abuse of the system, because the prosecuting barrister, the sole reason that he's asking this question is to try and make the jury look unfavourably on Lucy Letby. And in order to do that, he's asking an unfair question that is untrue. Now, Lucy obviously said, I have cried over those babies, but he already knows that to be true. It's not as if he's trying to extract some useful information from her. He knows that what he's saying is untrue, and he's just hoping that he can plant that idea in the minds of the jury. Now, in what way is that an acceptable way to decide criminal cases? In what way is that likely to produce an unprejudiced outcome? It's not likely at all. So, I mean, I have serious concerns about that, but I just wanted more broadly or more specifically, to deal with the fact that this accusation was made, and it's a pretty scurrilous accusation, and it's completely unfounded. And I think it's one of the biggest myths about the Lucy Letby case, the idea that she was unemotional and that she didn't cry over any of the infants, is simply demonstrably untrue.